I tell this story all the time. The listeners are like, yeah, Blaine, we've heard this story. But I had dinner with someone who was an Olympian mogul skier, and then now he coaches Olympian mogul skiers. And he said that the thing that separates naturally good athletes, naturally good mogul skiers from competitors are obsessed with their weaknesses and building up those weaknesses. And they may not be the best natural mogul skier out there. And it just really stuck with me. I probably say it every other episode. In trading, like, anyone can hit a home run. Literally anyone. But if you can't build up those icky parts, yeah.
I mean, that's it, right? When the going gets tough, what happens, right? Do you break down? Do you overreact? Do you bleed a slow death? Do you just blow up? Or are you able to, I think the optimal is being able to recognize that while you are losing or in a drawdown, that you're actually not making decisions in a fundamentally different way. And to do that is really hard. You have to spend time to really understand what your decision-making process looks like in general, and then how it will depart and start to break down under extreme stress. And that decision-making process as a trader, as a poker player, as an esport athlete, to me is equal to a golfer's golf swing, right? There's a technique to it. And, in golf, it's very common to understand that stress and pressure breaks down your swing in the places where it's weak. However, right, the more well-trained it is and the stronger those weaknesses become, right, the integrity in your technique becomes a buffer against that stress. And so traders can benefit from training their decision-making process, becoming more precisely aware of the nuances in which it exists in optimal form, and training that actively, pushing it, right? Even when they may not necessarily be making decisions, quote unquote, like entering a position, but when they're making decisions and deciding not to get in, the training effect that can occur really becomes a buffer against the stress when, the market is not going to reward you for your edge.
By accessing this podcast, you acknowledge that the Penny Lane podcast makes no warranty, guarantee, or representation as to the accuracy or sufficiency of the information featured in this podcast. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk. This podcast should not be considered professional or financial advice. Unless specifically stated otherwise, the Penny Lane podcast does not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast, and information from this podcast should not be referenced in any way to imply such approval or endorsement. The third-party materials or content of any third-party site referenced in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the opinions, standards, or policies of the Penny Lane podcast. The Penny Lane podcast assumes no responsibility or liability for the accuracy or completeness of the content contained in third-party materials or on third-party sites referenced in this podcast, or the compliance with applicable laws of such materials and/or links referenced herein.